Right, before I start, I'll just start off with an amusing story. It's to do with quiz nights. About 30 years ago, I went to a quiz night, and there was 14 tables in this room, round tables. Each table had 8 people on the table. I went with a group of other people, but we got there late, and we were right at the back of the room on table 12. Behind us was table 13 and 14. And as you know, in the old days, you used to have a pad of paper and used to write your results down on the thing. At any rate, I noticed table 13 and 14 were empty, and the thing had started. And I said to my brother, "Quick, let's just grab that one from table 13, and we'll do a fake one." So we got away with it, and there's a big whiteboard at the back, and everyone was writing down the things. Anyway, to cut a long story short, we did come last. Anyway, the prizes were awarded. First prize is $50 voucher, second prize was 30 and whatever. Anyway, there was a booby prize. And everyone went, "Ooh, a booby prize." No, I came up on stage. The guy presented me with this prize, and guess what we won? We won dinner for 8. Ooh. Now, it sounds good, but it wasn't. It was a loaf of bread and 2 tins of baked beans. So that's a good start. Quiz nights. What's the most popular World War II movie of all time? Of World War II movie? No, you know what it is? Sound of Music. See, it's a strange one, good one. Now, before I start, I must apologise for, the name dropping. You know, people go, "Ooh, yeah." There'll be a lot of people you will hear and see on the screen here that I've met or had contact with. I like, and I've done this talk with I'm a member of the IBNS, the Banknote Society, coins, and I've done a lot of travel, and I love aviation, and I like military history. So it's just a combination of everything, and I just hope you enjoy it. Okay, so let's just try the first one. Yes, as I said, I'm going to be talking, but I'll be like Ronnie Corbett or Sandy Stone, and I like to kind of sit down there and chat like a nice fireplace chat, but all right, we'll see how we go. I better quickly tell you this one. I dealt in antiques. Anyway, one day I came back from London, and I'd been on a buying trip, and I had some Gould prints, John Gould, who drew birds and things. Anyway, I went to see Warren Anderson. He was one of our clients at work in his office in West Perth. Warren had the office there, if you ever go there, is just full of animals, stuffed animals and pictures. Anyway, I had an appointment with him. So I spoke to the secretary. She says, "Oh, he's just wait in the waiting room." And this waiting room is quite a long room, probably from that here to here there. And I went in there, and there's one other guy looking at pictures. And I walked in, and I thought, "Oh, I know that guy." It was Barry Humphries. But I couldn't think of his name. I could only name as Dame Edna. I couldn't really go up and say, "Hello, Dame Edna," So anyway, we had a lovely chat about pictures and things, and I just, but I think he appreciated the fact that I didn't say, "Oh, Barry," I just, "Oh, yeah, it's a nice picture. It's good." And we just had a lovely little chat together. So I've done that. Okay. Now, my father, Michael John Dalrymple Goldingham, he was an artist, and this is a self-portrait he did, obviously. And this is him in Applecross, where I live, in a studio, and he did a lot of stipple work and bits and pieces, an artist. So that's that. Now, the only thing I can think of aviation related to my father was he was an overseas general manager of an insurance company, and he used to do a lot of flying around the world. And back in the 60s, he was on a flight from Johannesburg back to London. And earlier on that day, a plane had crashed. And when he landed in London, the pilot on the plane that he was on said, "That's the last plane." This was the Comet. He was on the very last Comet flight that ever flew. They were all grounded from that day onwards. So that's the only thing I can think of with his aviation. My father was a prisoner of war. They were all issued these wartime logs. He used it to just do stories and bits and pieces. This is what my father wrote. He did lots of these things, and also drawings. partly the prisoners were issued these books. You're not going to say, next week we're going to escape. So it was just a diary. Now, if you look at that picture, that is a place called Fontanellata. This is a camp called PG 49. And my father, let's just go to the next shot. This is my father was released from there with two other guys, from the camp on September the 8th, 1943. I went there on September the 8th, 2003 for a 60th anniversary. These guys here, those are the last remaining survivors from the prisoner of war camp. The place is a lovely place. It's an old monastery. We had a meeting there. That's me with the Lord Mayor, the Mayoress of Fontanellata, and that's another one of the actual building. An amusing story. When you went into the camp, you wrote what you did, etc. And one of the questions was what religion you are. So my father thought, well, I'm in Italy, I'll put Roman Catholic. Never thought another thing about it. Anyway, one day the papal nuncio came to this camp to give a talk, and no one really turned up and things. Anyway, my father was chosen as one of the best Catholics. He said, okay. So he was presented with a gold cross by the papal nuncio, which he sold for 2 packets of cigarettes. Now, do you remember a guy called Maurice Carr? He used to write articles in the Daily News every day. Anyway, my father sent that to him, and he became the old sinner of Applecross. My father used to write stories every day, and they were published in the paper virtually every day, so that was an interesting story. So, okay, now I don't know if you've heard of this guy, Eric Newby. He's written various books. He wrote various books. Here he was released with my dad and John Mears, and they ran away into the Apennines. He wrote a book called Escape to the Apennines. A lot of people went north to Switzerland or south, whatever. My father headed west, and he went to a place called Villora. In the diary it says where he went to. Anyway, this is a guy called Marco Labadini, and he lived in this village Villora. As I said, I went to this reunion with my wife, ex-wife, and we went to try and find this guy, try and find where he was. And we found the town, obviously, and we went to this gravesite, and then we found out where my father stayed in this farmhouse, and that's Marco's son. There's my wife. Now, if you look on the table here, there's a stool. Now I picked that up, and there's my wife with the stool. That was used by my dad milking the cows in 1940 something. So I brought that back as a souvenir. This is Donald Pleasance. He was in the Great Escape. Now my dad, he was an artist, as I said. Now he was also the forger. So my dad was similar to Donald Pleasance. He used to do lots of forging. I'll tell you that in a minute. James Garner was in the same film. Now I used to work at the Perth Flight Centre, and I feel that I was like James Garner. I used to have to source things, mainly fruit and veggies and things that people wanted to take back overseas, etc. One of our clients was a guy called Dr. Ho, very successful businessman. He owned 4 jets, had 4 wives, lived in Hong Kong, immensely rich, and he was a regular client of ours. And my job was to just source things. As I said, he used to love apricots and peaches and things. I used to take them, get them and source them. But Cathay Pacific used to fly down from Hong Kong and arrive at 7 in the morning. I could drive airside. He drove underneath the aircraft, went up the little gantry, in through the side door, and I went inside the aircraft as soon as it had landed, and I picked up some newspapers, the night before's papers, which had today's date on, raced back in my car, drove round to his private jet, and I dropped him on his seat. And he was really impressed. How on earth did you get today's paper from Hong Kong? So I just felt that like James Garner. Now there's my father, and there's another lot. These are prisoners that he drew while he was in the prisoner of war camp. Now, he used to have a prisoner in front of him, and he'd draw they would draw the prisoners. Germans used to come in and say, "Oh, very good, well done." As soon as the Germans were out the door, whoomp, he was forging all sorts of things, paperwork, all the banknotes and bits and pieces. I'll show you. I've got these are some of the guys my father was in Brunswick in off Lagos 79. Another shot there. That's this is a diary. This is prison money. He used to forge that as well. That's his pass as you see, insurance. Actually there he's put Church of England, so this is when he went to Offleg 79. So he came from a place called Great Missenden. He was born in Great Missenden, which will come up next, I think. There's some banknotes, real ones, that German money. Now there's my father on his wedding day. To his right, there's my two aunts and my mum. My aunt on the right-hand side here, Joan Ledingham, was my mum's sister, and Ginny. Now they were in the war, and they worked at a certain place, and no one was ever to know where they worked. And 50 years later, after the war, they said where they worked. They worked at Bletchley Park with the Enigma machine, and that's the Enigma machine. Now, that Enigma machine, that was I took that photograph on our trip in Italy. We went north of Venice and to a place called Bolzano. Has anyone heard of Bolzano? Bolzano is the place where there's a guy called Orsi, who's the oldest person in the world, but they found him on the Austrian Italian border in the snow, and when you go and see him, he's in a fridge. When you go to Bolzano, you can actually see him in a fridge. And that's a £50 note with Alan Turing. Now, he was my aunt's boss at Bletchley. Now, my other aunt, Patsy, my mum also, she was in the war. She worked at Bart's Hospital, and she worked in a special ward with RAF pilots who had been injured, and when they'd had their, I'm sorry to say this, but their faces taken, kind of blown apart or whatever. And she worked in a ward where the pilots had to have their arm up here, and they had to have skin grafts. Has anyone heard of that? They've obviously changed now, but my other aunt, Patsy, she worked as a nurse. Now, the woman in the middle here is Patricia Neal. Has anyone ever heard of her? She is, and the guy on her left, on the right, is Roald Dahl. I'll tell you more about that in a minute. Patricia Neal worked with Audrey Hepburn on Breakfast at Tiffany's. She was the manager. And this is Rita Hayworth. My dad, as I said, was in insurance. Rita came to his office and he sold her some insurance. And she was in The Shawshank Redemption, which is another really good film. Christopher Lee, my father went to the same school as Christopher Lee. And my cousin in New Zealand, he's a tall guy with a beard like that. And he was the double for Christopher Lee in Lord of the Rings. So there's so many links, it's just unbelievable what happens. Now, Roald Dahl was an interesting person. I read a book called Flying Solo, I think it's called, Going Solo. Now, Roald Dahl, he went solo after 8 hours in a Spitfire. 8 hours, not bad. And he flew a Spitfire. And I read this book. Roald lived in Great Missenden, where the family home is. So I phoned my aunt in Great Missenden, and I said, any chance of having a cup of tea with Roald Dahl? And so she phoned him and said, yeah, come on down. We'll, when you come to England in a month's time, I've organised a cup of tea, etc. Unfortunately, he died about a week before I got there, but he would have been a fascinating guy to chat with. So if you ever get to Great Missenden, there's actually a museum in Great Missenden with where he did all his writings and bits and pieces and whatever. In 2018, I was invited over to England by my best mate Marty to go and see a place where his uncle went. Now, I went there and I went on this inaugural Perth to London flight. As you see, there's Mark McGowan, Paul Papalier, Rob Scott. I was just tucked into the right-hand side there, actually. Yeah, it was an interesting flight. It was a lot of fun. Everyone enjoyed themselves and the media on board, and we just had a great time. And you know how people, when they rush to get on a plane, I thought to myself, why? It's a 17-hour flight. So I made sure I was the very last person on board. So I was the last person to board the flight. Now, I went to a school called Hall Grove in England, and a place called Bagshot, which is next door to Windlesham, where I used to live. It's it's a famous school, still going. But back in the 1780s, 1790s or whatever, a certain person used to go to that house by stagecoach, stay 2 nights, and then carry on down south to Portsmouth. And that guy was Nelson. Horatio Nelson used to come in. At a presentation note they made. De La Rue is a company that makes banknotes, and that's just a trial note they had, and that's Horatio Nelson. Now, Marty Byrne, interesting person. He's got a a couple of Australian links. His mum lived in Melbourne. I went to see her once and I stayed and whatever. Been here ever since, I suppose. He also had a link. He was in. He went to Oxford University. He went to Balliol College. Now, one of his. He used to play rugby, and he used to play against another college. And the guy he used to play with had an Australian link. Anyone like to have a? Anyway, it was Tony Abbott. Now, this leads me into what the whole story I was going to tell you was about Colditz. So Marty, myself and my brother left London. Now we didn't go leave London Airport, we left London, not Heathrow, but London Airport. Has anyone been to London Airport? The one, it's one that it's just in London. You can take a tube there and it's just a single runway, I think, isn't it? And you can only take up to 737s, I think, I'm not sure, but small aircraft. We left there and we flew down to Berlin, and then we hired a car and went down to Colditz. Now, Marty Byrne, now I'm 67 and I've known Marty 60 years. He used to live near me in Windlesham. He lived at a place called Windlesham Court. My brother, myself and Marty, we were naughty little boys really, fooling around, and Windlesham Court had a lovely old house and with some fields around it. It's all been taken over now. A guy called Nick Faldo, he's a golfer, I don't know if you know him. He took over the house and he converted the farm into a golf course. So now it's a nine hole golf course. Shame really still. Anyway, naughty things, well, as I said, we lived in Windlesham, which is near Windsor. We were at Savile Gardens and we were wandering around, and somehow we got into another area. And we were walking along as kids, like you do, fooling around. This old woman came walking up towards us with a stick and said, "You can't come here." So we told her what we thought of her, and we ran away and we realised who it was. It was, sorry to say, Queen Mum. But anyway. Yes. Anyway, so there's Marty Byrne. In the background is Colditz Castle. Now, Marty Byrne's uncle, Mickey Byrne, he was at Colditz. Now, it's probably famous, I suppose, in the aviation is this glider. Now, that's a reproduction one, and that's another shot of another one in the museum there, and that's another picture. Now, we'll go through the glider first. I think Mythbusters tried to copy it back in 1992. They built a replica and they put it on the outside where the plane was going to take off, and they had a bath full of concrete on the end of a rope and launched that. There are two dummies in the front of the plane. Took it off. It did fly, but it crashed. But who knows if they would survive? But it's one of those things. Mythbusters. I had to try and find out. Now, Mickey Byrne went to the prisoner of war camp about 50 years after the war ended, and he was shown around, had a look around, and there's a picture of a section of the roof which has been made into a museum thing, but there's a radio there. And Mickey went there and he said, "Oh, have you found that? You obviously know about the secret room." And they said, "No, what do you mean secret room?" And here it is. There's a panel, and Mickey used to sit on that stool and have radio contact with England and various things, but it was all hush-hush. But they didn't find it till 50 years after the war. Unbelievable. There is Mickey Byrne in the actual room, 50 years later, I suppose, yeah. And that's more shots of Colditz, and that's a tunnel. We're very lucky. Marty managed to persuade the tour guide to give us, normally the tour is an hour and a half, but ours is about 3 hours, and we went everywhere, had a fantastic time. You can actually stay in the camp. We stayed in the German quarters, officers' quarters, which has been converted into kind of backpackers, and there's a kitchen there, and there's lifts lifts to get on the third and fourth floor. So no, it's a really good experience. Now, one of the famous people who was there was a guy called Douglas Bader. You all know him. Reach for the Sky. One interesting story is he was shot down, and as you know, he had two wooden legs. One of his wooden legs was jammed in the controls and he couldn't get out. At any rate, the Germans gave permission for a Spitfire to drop a fake leg down over the Colditz Castle, and so he picked it up. A quick one with Douglas Bader. My father used to meet him. We'll see him in London virtually every day. He used to work near my father. And Douglas Bader, if you remember the film Reach for the Sky, was actually filmed at a place called the Pantiles. You remember the lounge, the tea lounge? Well, that is literally a mile away from where I used to live, and it used to be a nightclub. I used to go there as a kid in a nightclub, and that's the actual Pantiles. It's been knocked down now. Now it's a nursing home. I went there a few years ago, and there's a plaque saying Douglas Bader was here some years ago. Interestingly, here we go, name dropping. Opposite this nursing home in Bagshot is a place called Bagshot Hall, and Prince Edward lives there, the Queen's son. Other famous people who were in prisoner war camps were Clive Dunn from Dad's Army, Desmond Llewellyn from James Bond films. Another guy who went to a prisoner war camp was a guy called Roy de Treese. Now, I've got a story about him. One of the jobs I had was working at the Majesty's Theatre here in Perth, and one of the shows was a show called Mr. Lincoln, about Abraham Lincoln, and it was a one-man show, and Roy de Treese was doing it. Anyway, one night, he was doing the show, and he was on a podium, and he slipped off, and he fell to the ground, and he cracked a couple of ribs. Anyway, after he found out he'd done the ribs and he could do nothing about it. And after one of the shows, I said to him, how are you feeling? He said, oh, still a bit stiff. He said, well, are you doing anything tonight? He said, no. Well, come on down to my brother's house. He's got a swimming pool and a spa bath. Come and have a spa. So he came down, had a spa, and he felt better after it. And we had dinner afterwards, a few sandwiches. Now, there's a few women here. I don't want to... Anyway, I apologise for what I'm about to say. I said to Roy, have you got any funny stories? And he said, well, yes. I was in Cambridge doing a show. Now in Cambridge, these little boats called punts. At any rate, he was on stage one night and he had to say, put the cushion on the punt. So anyway, that's a little story, but it's a very amusing story. But here's a lovely guy. So that's Roy de Treese. Another famous person, Australian, was Bud Tingwell. He went to prisoner war camp. Denholm Elliott, Donald Pleasance, Sam Kidd. Now, if you notice, all these people in The Great Escape, like Dennis Price, they were actors and things, and that's probably what started their careers. So the World War II was probably quite a good thing. Talking of which, going back to Mickey Byrne, he, very famous person, there's a video all about him, but he was very famous. Before the war, he actually had a signed copy, he actually met Adolf Hitler and had a signed copy of Mein Kampf, and he was also at the Nuremberg rallies. He could speak German, and then he went to England and captured, and then went to Colditz, but he could speak German, so that's why he probably did quite well in Germany. No, during the war, there was a woman called Ella van Heemstra. She was a baroness, and she sent food parcels to Mickey and other people from Red Cross. After the war, he sent food parcels to her because she was a baroness, but she lost her house and all the stuff. And he used to send cigarettes and things that she could sell on, and also penicillin. Now, penicillin saved this baroness's daughter. She would have died if she didn't have this penicillin. Anyone like to have a guess who the daughter was? We've seen her already, Audrey Hepburn. Unbelievable, isn't it? The links, gosh, Audrey Hepburn. Yeah, Rotherfield Hall was one of the schools I went to. Very unusual school, there's only 25 of us there. Very unusual school, but I went to school with a guy called Nick McCulloch, who is now a very famous military expert, and an aviation story. He used to commute between London and New York. He worked for Sotheby's, and he was scheduled to fly out on December the 22nd to go to New York for a meeting on the Monday morning. But his wife said to him, oh, you can't go to New York on Saturday, you'll have to go on the Sunday because we've got a dinner party. And Nick said, oh, okay. So he cancelled his flight and he went the next day. Now, the flight he would have gone on was the Lockerbie one. Unbelievable, can you imagine that? I told a friend of mine, and she said, I knew someone who cancelled their flight and went on the Lockerbie one. So that's life, isn't it? That's life. So this is a dear friend of mine, Richard Taggart. Very interesting guy. He went to Rotherfield. He was highly intelligent guy. Gosh, he had 8 O-levels, 8 A-levels. And he became a teacher, went to Canterbury University, and then he got a job in Belgium. interpreter, and then he actually worked for the UN. He used to work with diplomats and bits and pieces. To a very intelligent guy. Unfortunately, he died last year, and this is last year on July the 1st, his birthday. One of his bucket lists was to go on a Spitfire, and luckily he did. He went on a Spitfire. All right, I might as well tell you the story about my father's best man, Bill Wyatt. Now, have you heard of a woman called Tessa Wyatt? She was in a comedy program, Man About the House and things, or something like that. She was there. She lives in Wimbledon. Every year she used to rent her house out for the tennis players. And this year she rented it out to Steffi Graf for two weeks, because she was #1 seed. And it was about £2,000 or something for 2 weeks. Anyway, unfortunately, Steffi Graf was knocked out in the first round, and she decided to leave with her boyfriend, and so she moved back in the house. So she paid $2,000 for 1 day. Great-great-grandfather, James Arbuthnot, lived in London, and he was a gambler, and he was apparently the second best whist player in London. He used to play cards on a table using that tablecloth with, wait for it, the Prince of Wales, Edward VII, the Queen's son. And I've got a picture of James with the King and a guy called Dulip Singh. And this James was also an artist, and he did a picture of the Maharaja, and it's in Lahore Museum, Art Museum in Lahore. So that's another interesting story. Can I tell you shall I have one more story? I'll tell you my Halls Creek story. Okay, I got a job as a driller's offsider. This is in June 1981. Got a job as a driller's offsider. Flew up with, I think it's Jan Beers. What was that? No, Jan Beers Aviation. Flew up in a Baron. It's a long way up to near Halls Creek, to a place called Billaluna. We flew, I think, Perth, Meeker, Newman, Billaluna. This job was a shocking job. The health and safety was just unbelievable. We had to drill holes, 75 feet drill holes, and attach an Anzite bomb to it with a detonator, drop it down the hole, leave the cable outside. Then another crew came along and blew up all these bombs to see how much oil was underneath the canning basin, or what it was. So the first day I was on the job, we were taken in a Land Cruiser, say 3 people in the front and 2 in the back or something, rolling around. Anyway, we went to a container which was full of Anzite bombs, picked up a load of bombs, put them in the back of the ute. Then we went to another area, which is another container, which is filled with detonators. So we picked them up and we chucked them in the back of the ute. Anyway, this health and safety inspector, I don't know why he was there, he came in, looked and said, "What are you doing with bombs and detonators in the same thing, and you're rolling around?" So we had to take them out and get another ute, and it was just unbelievable. The water tank, I had an HGV license. The water tank I drove was a converted troop carrier with the tracks down the side, World War II tracks, World War II vehicle, and it was converted into a water truck. I think it had 8 forward gears and 4 reversers. An incredible machine. At any rate, I'd just done a night shift. I was coming back, and I always remember it was a beautiful scene. There was wild horses running along the side, and I was listening to Ian Cameron. You remember Ian Cameron on the radio, ABC? And it was the unbelievable moment. I'll always remember it. There's these wild horses. Anyway, I got back to camp, had a couple of hours sleep, and my boss woke me up and said, "Miles, you can take me to Halls Creek. We've got to get some supplies." I said, "Oh, okay." So off we went. We drove into, and I was covered in grease and oil and stuff like that. And I thought, "Oh, well, so what?" Got into Halls Creek. Instead of going straight to the supermarket, we went to the Halls Creek pub. You know, obviously like you do. And there was my boss having a drink, and we had our meal. Anyway, in the beer garden was all these people dressed in white. Naval outfits. There was half a dozen, all these guys standing like this. And there was the governor of WA, a guy called Richard Trowbridge. And he was there. He was on a whirlwind visit of WA. He was in the garden yakking away. And I just happened to say to Sandy, my boss, I said, "Oh, I used to know his predecessor, because this Richard Trowbridge was the admiral on the Britannia, the Queen's ship." So I just happened to say I knew Patrick McMorgan. He was his predecessor. At any rate, Sandy must have had a chat with someone, blah, blah, blah. And I was eating my meal, I just finished it, and these two guys in naval outfit came up to me, excuse me, Richard wants to have a chat with you. And I said, what? Look, I'm filthy. So I said, well, I've got to apologise, I'm really filthy, and not, Anyway, I went in there and I was introduced to him, shook his hand, I said, I can't, look at me, I'm in a terrible state, and I told him what I was doing. He said, oh, don't worry. Anyway, and I said to him, I know Patrick Morgan. He said, oh yeah, Patrick, yeah. And Patrick Morgan lived in Worplesdon. Another side story, here we go. I went to an agricultural college and did landscape gardening at Merist Wood in Worplesdon. I was on the same course as Roddy Llewellyn. Do you remember Roddy Llewellyn, who was having an affair with Princess Margaret? It's unbelievable. Right. So, keep going. But going back to Richard Trowbridge and his wife, we spent about 20 minutes having a lovely chat, and mainly about Patrick Morgan's garden, the Yacusamanian plants and the rhododendrons and all these other things. We had a lovely time. And Richard said to me, that's fantastic, this has really made my day, because I've meant to come up here and chat. But, and then at the end he said to me, I'm going to a wedding next week, and I'm going to be sitting next door to Patrick Morgan. I'll say I met you and had a chat. Anyone like to have a guess whose wedding it was? Charles and Diana. Unbelievable. It's just couldn't believe it. But when I went back to Cab, I was known as the governor's boy. So, at any rate, I think we've got another speech. Someone's going to talk about Bletchley. So, anyway, I hope I haven't bored you, and I hope it's not too much name dropping. But anyway, thank you.
My name's Peter Marshall, member of the Aero Club here. Have we got any poms in the right? Well, this story will probably sink right home to you. We heard about prisoner of war camps. My mum was a British Army nurse, and she spent 6 weeks working in Bergen-Belsen, the German concentration camp, the infamous one where they used to kill the Jews. 6 weeks she did in there, and after that they took her to sent her to the military hospital at Nuremberg, where the big war trials were on. And Mum used to tell stories about having drinks with Lord Pierpoint, the English hangman. But it must have knocked Mum around something terrible, because when they got back to England, Mum was offered a part British military disability pension. Now then, Mum, Dad and me, as a 4.5-year-old kid from Bristol, we migrated to Australia in 1951. We were sponsored in Bundaberg by a former nursing colleague of my mum's. But if Mum had accepted that part British military disability pension that was on offer from the British government, the Australian government would never have allowed us to migrate to Australia. Bit rough, isn't it? We're all on the same side, and Dad was a keen follower of politics and world events and what have you, and he was pretty sure that another shit fight was going to start in the Middle East, and he wanted to get out of it and get as far away from it as he could, because they reckon they've done their porridge. So that's why we migrated to Australia. But I suppose there's a lot of people of our generation can tell stories from their parents that experienced during the war. So that's my little family story.